Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 52 Topics with Frank Fiordilino. Episode 4, 1977. For those of you who have not seen 1986, please go check that out. This is going to be a running theme of the podcast. We'll be covering years. Sometimes we'll bring in a guest. We'll talk about interesting events that transpired that year, whether they be culturally, criminally, anything historical having to do with the year. Frank might tell you, what the song of the year was. We'll talk sports, a bunch of different stuff. And today we do have a guest joining us, somebody who you may have seen on my channel, NYC Crime Spot, somebody who you may have seen over the summer that just passed, appearing in the New York Post, appearing in other news outlets in reference to his work with the Son of Sam case, something that he's been pretty much taken over his life for the past 4 years. And something tells me he's got some great plans in the future. The man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Manny Grossman. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Crime Spot. Can you hear me? Because I just am having some computer issues.
No, we could hear you fine, man.
All right, cool. Hey,
Hey,
well,
man,
thanks.
welcome.
Hey, Frank and Crime Spot. Thanks so much for having me. Um, Great to be here. Been listening to your guys' podcast for the last couple episodes and really am into it. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you guys this morning.
Can you tell the audience, Manny, for those of you, because there is people that are coming that might not know who you are, if you could just give us a rundown of what you do and kind of where you think you're heading, maybe.
Sure. Briefly, in 2021, I started a video series on the Son of Sam crimes after having been into the Son of Sam topic for, well, up to that point, about 25, 27 years. Started in the early 90s. Became an obsession of mine. And, during the lockdowns, had a lot of time on my hands. So I decided to go out and show the sights of the Son of Sam, and it became a very virally popular video series. It took us in a lot of different directions, and 4 years later, I'm still doing my thing. And we even found a new victim, Wendy Savino. So it was the capstone. Yeah, it was the capstone of the video series, and it's been a fun ride, and I've certainly learned a lot. And really looking forward to talking to you guys today because I heard you got some personal stories here about 1977 and a particular Son of Sam victim. So that's basically my story in a nutshell.
Yep, and as always, our co-host, Mr. Frank Fiordilino. Frank, how are you?
Good, not bad, not bad. This is kind of like a really I don't know. I do I love parts of 1977, and parts of 1977 were traumatic not only for me, for my family. It was the year we lost a loved one, but so much bad things were going around us. We were immigrants to this country at that point for 5 years. We arrived at 72, and the American dream was looking like the American nightmare. You say, well, what's a 7-year-old kid remember about a specific year? And I'm like, well, I remember more about 1977 when I was 7 than I do of 1987 when I was 17, because that's how much shit was going on at the time. It was a really traumatic time between the blackouts, the Son of Sam, like Manny has followed. There was so much stuff going around. The looting, the blackouts, just a lot of bad things. And I remember some of the good things too. It was a disco era, some music that's still embedded in my mind. When I listen to, music takes you back. You know what I mean? You hear some like the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and stuff that reminds me of the old Brooklyn that no longer exists. So with that, let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, so I think Son of Sam is actually a good place to start because Son of Sam is going into 1977. David Berkowitz. By the time the blackouts are hitting, he's going to be entering into his second summer of causing wreck in New York City, causing a havoc, a public freakout. So, Manny, let's say 1977 is beginning. It's January. We're into a new year. What is David Berkowitz up to? What has he just done? And from your research, what is the mental state of this young man running around the city? Basically
Well,
putting everyone on edge.
yeah, well, this guy loved it. I mean, he was a master manipulator. He was the ultimate narcissist. He loved the attention that he was getting. It was the only attention he ever got in his life, really, for anything. And he was absolutely reveling in it. Yet at the same time, he was definitely freaking out too. He was in his apartment up at Pine Street by this point. He had already committed several of the shootings by January of '77. And so they were not yet quite in the cat and mouse game, though. That came later in 1977. Still in January, the cops had an inkling that there was these connected shootings going on around the city, but they didn't quite have the proof of it until March of 1977. But in January, he committed the first of two shootings in the Forest Hills section of Queens. And on January 30th, he shot Christine and killed Christine Freund. And he didn't actually hit John Deal, her boyfriend at the time, but they were both in his car. They were warming up the car. They weren't in a lover's lane. They weren't making out or anything like the popular myth. And he just came up and pumped 3 bullets into the car. And the next thing he knows, his girlfriend, his almost 10-year girlfriend, is lying dead in his arms.
Yeah, so that's a person that I was very familiar with. John Deal was a bartender in my neighborhood, a real lovable guy. Even years later, he was stuck in the '70s stuff. Everybody knew a guy like that. He had the gold chains, the DA, and I didn't know about this though. One day, this is in the early '90s. I'm with my friend back then, my ex buddy, whatever, Joe Grimaldi, and we happened to go to the bar where John, and I always used to see John, always friendly, driving always fast cars, we always wave. And we walked into the bar where he bartends in this place called Martin's Lounge. It's on Gates and it's in Ridgewood, and I believe it was Underdunk. I could be wrong, or Woodwood, one or the other. We walk in and we just start talking in general. He goes, I think women came up and he was almost getting married at one time. He had like 15, 20 years on me. And we were just listening and he breaks into this story about, his girlfriend was killed years ago. And I'm like, well, how? Well, his son is Sam. I said, no shit. And I should have kind of like held back and been like, respected the time. I go, really? The son of Sam? And I'm like, you serious, John? He goes, yeah. We were coming out of Beefsteak Charlie's at Forest Hills, and they were getting in the car, and the fucking guy just started popping at the girl. It didn't pop at him.
Right.
And make a long story short, they were victims at the time. And I was saying, wow. So I kept on going. I guess I had one drink, maybe too many, and my friend at the time, Joe Grimaldi, just kicks me under the fucking table like, stop now, really stop. You see the fucking guy's about to cry. Just what the fuck's wrong with you? I'm like, oh, all right, my bad. I didn't, but I was so into just happening to know a victim of this fucking guy that just terrorized the whole city and myself. Being a 7-year-old kid on Hemrod Street, Knickerbocker area, Bushwick, and talking to a really true victim was kind of eerie at the same time, but kind of like exciting in a weird way. And
I got one question before you
sure.
continue. I when I first started doing heavy research in the modern era about Sam, about Son of Sam, I one of my goals was to come across people like yourself who had known victims, met them, spoke to them, and I met this one guy who told me that John Deal would actually drive the same blue Camaro that he had the night that his
Wow.
girlfriend got shot, and that it still had the bullet holes in it. I'm just wondering if you remember that at all, or
I
if that's
remember him driving fast cars, but not always the same car. He would switch up every now and then.
something.
Um, he came across, like, remember that guy in something out of Three's Company, if you guys are familiar with that stuff.
Larry.
He was like Larry, yeah. Yeah, he was that type of guy, but he was lovable. He was a really nice guy. He died of cancer. I was on the streets back when that happened. But he was heartbroken. Austrian descent. I remember that there was a lot of Austrians in my neighborhood.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. So wait, so at this point you lived in that neighborhood of Ridgewood?
At the time, not when Son of Sam was around. I lived in Bushwick.
No,
This is
when you were talking to John.
yes, and I had friends of mine that used to go in there and play cards in the back room. Sometimes it wasn't a card joint; it was a bar. But a card game would break out like any kind of bar in New York City would. So I would hang out. There was an older group of guys that hung out there, and I would hang out with them sometimes. Shout out to the Martin Lounge guys.
Now,
Um,
what's the deal with this Austrian stuff? Because like, isn't there like a heavy? Because his name was Deal, which is German. Her name was Freund, which was German. I heard him
they
speak.
were Austrian, actually. They were Austrian.
Austrian. He had like this strange accent, and I was told that that whole neighborhood was filled with people like him. Like, do you have any?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. If you look at Ridgewood in particular, and back in the like the 40s during Hitler's coming up, the 30s, the 40s, if you're familiar with that era, I'm talking about Ridgewood. My family was in Sicily, but Ridgewood was a big German hideout type of place. I mean, they actually in the 60s they actually caught a woman that was a Nazi Nazi guard in one of those camps in Maspeth. So it was
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
So it was there. Yes, yes. Well, check it out in the 60s. And they had this one bar that my brother ended up buying called the Eagle's Nest that was there from like the 30s and the 40s. Well, the 30s or 40s, I believe. That was the name of the place. And the Eagle's Nest was actually where Hitler in Bavaria he called his hideout.
You know, what's interesting is that now all the conspiracy heads, because there are people out there who think that Berkowitz acted with others. I mean, that's a whole other story.
Sure,
It's been
sure.
totally debunked. But one of the spots in Untermeyer Park up in Yonkers where they said that he would hang out was this place called the Eagle's Nest. So just you
Wow.
saying the Eagle's Nest now, that's going to bring a whole bunch of conspiracy
wow.
heads to the.
Well, that was dead. Back that bar, the Eagle's Nest, that's in Ridgewood. It's on Woodward and I believe Stanhope. It's a block down from Grover Cleveland High School. My brother owned it. After when he fixed it up, it was no longer a German bar.
Mhm.
But that bar right there, they say they used to have meetings there. The Bundesliga, which was a group of fascist American-born, a lot of American-born fascists and fascists from the other side, Germans, and they wanted to create a fascist government here in the United States.
Right. I've read about that, but I haven't done too much
Well, look at that. They
research.
had one of the biggest rallies in Madison Square Garden years
Right.
back.
Yes, I do remember that, hearing about that. Yeah, so this crazy Austrian German enclave within New York City, which I guess isn't that big a deal. I mean, New York City is filled with neighborhoods like that, especially in 1977. But what did Deal have to say? Did he talk about the case at all? Did he say anything about that night?
No, no. Well, he would. Yes. Well, he said that he was actually a suspect since it was the early stages of the Son of Sam.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not only did he lose the love of his life, but they're making him a suspect. Like in any kind of murder case, they always go after the boyfriend or the husband
Correct.
until the gun shows up again in another case, and they say, "Well, it couldn't have been this fucking guy." You know what I mean?
Not
Um,
only did it show up in another case, Frank, but his next victim, Virginia Voskerichian, he shot just about 50 feet away from where he shot Christine and Christine Freund. And
oh wow!
it was about a month later. So this guy was like getting brazen at the time, and he shot this next one in March of 77. He shot her at 7:30 in the evening when the rush hour traffic was coming home. Yeah, right on the city street. And so that was a crazy story. And it's not a surprise that he was a victim. I'm dealing with that now with the Savino case, the newly found victim. All the critics of the case are saying it was her husband. It was her husband. Meanwhile,
Right.
they investigated the hell out of him. They said that he was a mobster, a guy named Joe Savino. He was heavily hooked up here in the Bronx. He was. You ever hear of a restaurant called Nina's up in the Bronx?
No,
Back in the
no,
old days?
No, there was that one place, Dom's on Arthur Avenue. There was a couple of places. I could count on my hand how many times I've been in that part of the world. You know,
Right,
I know it's
right.
New York City, but it's a world apart when you're from where I'm from.
Exactly.
Uh,
But I'm curious if you think about it, if you speak to anybody who might remember those years, who was an adult back then, if they remember Nina's restaurant in the Bronx, because that's where this shooting of Wendy took place, in the back parking lot.
oh
And
wow.
they said it was a mobbed up joint, that they found a guy
Mhm.
hanging from a meat hook there, and that's where they got the inspiration for Goodfellas. I
Oh
don't
wow.
even I don't have a clue. But yeah, the husband or the boyfriend's always considered the suspect, and they ruled him out pretty quickly. But
Yeah,
that
John was a suspect for a good time too, and it caused a lot of friction with the families. Like the girl's family. They
interesting,
started. Yeah, they started looking at him in another way. You know, some believed
right?
he had something to do with it. Some believe because who knows him? Who knows what the reason behind that was?
The same
Um,
exact thing happened to the first official victim, Donna Loria, Italian girl from the Bronx. Her boyfriend Vinny Minutolo, who by even by his own accounts, he wasn't like, an angel, right? But
mhm.
he was also considered the first suspect, and the family went against him, and they hated him, and they blamed him for. He had to deal with that until Berkowitz was arrested, like almost a year later. So yeah, it was the kind of shooting spree that not only affected obviously the people who were shot, but it totally rocked these people's families, and that often gets underlooked with regards to the Son of Sam case.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. These are little stories that people don't know about, and you know that devastate families. And this guy was a real creep.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
remember being a kid. You know, that whole Son of Sam tag that you see in that movie, The Summer of Sam. That
Hmm.
shit was it. That shit was a thing. Back to when I was a kid.
Really?
Um, yeah, I'm gonna get you the boogeyman and all that. I remember that stuff. I remember that everybody was always. I think women were dyeing their hair. I forgot what color, one or the other.
Yeah.
I so apparently after, and they were cutting their hair because it was after
Hmm.
blonde. You know, this is before the internet. This is before like, the gossip was not the gossip. It was like, gotta watch out. Don't go here. Don't go there.
Yeah,
And
a lot of it was media driven. They because a couple of victims had long brown hair, they made a blanket statement that if you're in danger if you have long brown hair. I mean, if you look at the victims list, there were short hair, there was blonde, there was
oh yeah,
men, there was
right,
women.
exactly.
Yeah.
Looking back, and I was like, that's why I'm confused. What actually what was the demographics he was looking for?
And
The
then there was
demo
the lovers lane thing was a myth too,
Exactly.
right?
The demographic was very simple. If you were in the wrong place at the wrong time when David Berkowitz came into your realm, he was going to shoot you. It didn't matter whether you were young, old, blonde, brunette, male, female. It was all victims of opportunity, because this dude was driving around almost every night prowling for victims. And I often say, like, there's probably 100 people walking around New York City right now who would have been his victims in an alternate timeline. And that, it's kind of
Right.
crazy to think about. But very interesting that you met this guy Deal. You're one of the few people with firsthand testimony and knowledge of this guy. And what else can you say about him?
I should have dug deeper. I definitely talked to a couple of people that knew him back in the day, and I should have um, asked.
Right, right.
I actually went there and see what, because they were closer than I was. He was just a friendly guy. He'd always wave. Was nice. He'd pass by the coffee shop and get coffee and just go to work sometimes. Really nice guy, but he was also part of his and proud of his Austrian neighborhood. The Austrian part, the Austrians we get in our neighborhood were Gachians, and they weren't ones that were part of Slovenia at the time, on the border of Yugoslavia, and just when it was the Austria-Hungary Empire, and then they just it depends on what side they were on, and they a lot of them immigrated, mostly immigrated after World War II, but there was some from around the beginning of the 20th century. So there was a lot of Austrians and many more than Italians, and then we'll get into that with the blackouts with the white flight.
Yeah, I want to get into because you
Yeah, please.
mentioned I want Manny, I want you to close up on Son of Sam because obviously he does get arrested ultimately. So if you could talk about, and then we'll get into the blackouts and everything else. And I know there is an overlap with the blackouts and David Berkowitz, but how does it kind of end for those of you out there wondering?
Well, he always considered this his job. That's what's kind of sick about it. And by the end, he was kind of sick of his job, like most people are sick of their jobs. And whether he did it on purpose or just unconsciously, at the last shooting, he in Brooklyn, which took place in Bath Beach, Bay 17th, and Shore Parkway, the murder of Stacy Moskowitz, he parked at a hydrant and he got a parking ticket. And he knew that he got a parking ticket, and he went ahead with the shooting anyway. So he had to know that the cops were going to look into those tickets, and apparently he didn't care. He went ahead with the shooting anyway, and about 10 days later, the cops finally put 2 and 2 together. They found the ticket. They said, "Yo, what was this Jewish dude from Yonkers doing in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, at 2:30 in the morning?" And that's when they called up Yonkers, and the rest is history. They caught him. Ironically enough, I just learned the other day, and this will be the last thing I say because I don't want to take over. But
No.
He on the night he was arrested, bringing this full circle back to my neighborhood of Riverdale, he was actually going out to when he walked downstairs and got into his car. He didn't know the cops were there. He was actually going down to my neighborhood in Riverdale to make a sweep to do a shooting that night. Yeah, it was. I just learned this the other day. It's crazy. So yeah, nobody was safe, and John Deal, unfortunately, not as you say, by all accounts, just a real nice, good-hearted person, and the fact that he had to live through that was just a horrendous thing in his life.
Yeah, rest in peace, John. I got 2 questions on this subject before you leave. He said at one point that he was going to be in the highest point of Queens that the night he was going to commit another killing. That's I was told or I read it somewhere. Did you ever hear that? And that would have been like by Mount Olivet Cemetery. There's Dead Man's Hill. Growing up was a hill right off of Elliott Avenue. And that was like rumored. Is there any truth to that myth right there?
So I actually never heard of that, Frank. Now Berkowitz was a prolific driver. Like as I always say, he was known to roam, and he literally would go down every block of every borough except for Staten Island. But never heard of Mount Olivet. It never came up in my research, so that's probably one of these urban myths that goes around. Just
Yeah,
like
no, sure.
yeah.
Sure.
And then you said you had a second question.
It was part of the first actually. Was he one to taunt the police like the Zodiac killer?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
It wasn't so much taunting. He later said that he wanted to warn the world about the dangers of Sam, his neighbor, Sam Carr, who he was convinced was the leader of the group that was ordering him to kill. Just crazy stuff. But yeah, he sent a couple letters to the first letter was left at a crime scene. It was addressed to the cops. But then the second letter went to the famous columnist Jimmy Breslin.
Right.
And that came out in June of 1977. And but really the most pivotal month for the Son of Sam spree, in my opinion, was April of 1977. It was really the moment when everything just started just going crazy for this guy, because he, in addition to his shooting spree in New York City, he was also on a terror campaign in his neighborhood. He was throwing Molotov cocktails in people's houses. He was shooting their dogs. He was sending threatening letters to them. And it all kind of came to a head in April of 77. So I often say that was like the most pivotal month. But now Mount Olivet in Queens, never heard of. And taunting the police, definitely. He loved the cat and mouse game. He loved the attention that he was getting. This was a narcissist who ultimately wanted the world to know who he was.
Second question. He was a postman, correct?
Correct. He worked at...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Please Finish.
No, my question is: does the term "going postal" derive from him, or that guy, the postal guy, the
I
postal worker that shot up a McDonald's at San Diego years ago? I don't
I,
know.
I think the term "going postal" came later,
Okay,
during the '80s. During this, because remember in the '80s, that's when all those shooting sprees started. Like as you
the
say,
mass shootings. Yeah.
yeah, as in McDonald's and in the people's workplaces. And
Okay.
I don't know the origin of that term, but it wasn't with Berkowitz. Interestingly enough, though, Berkowitz's timesheets are quite interesting from the Postal Service. He would always commit a shooting when he had a day off the next day, showing that he wasn't this crazy person. There was a lot of calculation going on in his head about these things, and that's the eternal dilemma with Berkowitz. Was he clinically insane, schizophrenic, or was he fully in control of his faculties and then made up the story? I'm more in the second camp. I think this dude knew exactly what he was doing, and he was just a sicko who enjoyed it, you know.
So you hear that, folks? If you're on the borderline of Ubats, do not go to the post office for a job. It's not going to make it better. And yeah, that was great stuff, man.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about the blackout of 77, July 13th to 14th. But I want to talk, this is something me and Frank spoke about a while ago, but Frank came to this country, as he said. What was that, Frank? 72?
We came in July of 1972.
72 from Sicily, landing in Bushwick. And I want to give everyone kind of an idea of what's going on in Bushwick at that time, because a lot of people always say, you know, there's this term, the Bronx is burning, the Bronx is burning. We see all this imagery of buildings. It looks like post World War II, you know, it just looks like a fucking hellscape, right? But in Bushwick, they were going through much of the similar problems. So I just want to read some stuff to people, and then I want to ask you, Frank, about growing up there. 1977, reports would state that as much as 1,000 of Bushwick's 12,000 buildings were vacant or burned down. From January to June of 1977, 804 fires were started. 260 of them were deemed suspicious fires. Daily News, August 1977. Bushwick is a place where people sleep with their clothes on and their bags packed, where parents often alternate on fire watch. It is a section of 120,000 souls and 6,000 fire calls a year, a sixth of them in buildings. It's a section of blackened, abandoned homes, block after block, and weed-choked lots where buildings once stood. A section of hideous, rubble-strewn desolation. A section that loses a house a day to a fire. A lot of these fires were started by landlords. A lot of these fires were started by kids who were hired by landlords. A lot of these fires were started by bored kids. And sadly enough, a lot of these fires were being started by people that inhabited these residences, because if a fire started, the city would relocate them to a different section of New York City so they could start over again and get out of the hell that is Bushwick. So, Frank, tell us about you coming here, landing in Bushwick. The smell of fire is constantly in the air. What is that like for a young kid like you?
Well, not in the beginning. Like the difference between like 75 and 76, it was a great place. I remember a lot of Sicilians. Sicilian was definitely our first language, with the neighbors, with the stores, with the bakeries. Everything was there. And 1977 comes, and in particular the summer of 1977, and the blackouts. Lightning bolt hits a power line. Everything goes out in the city. And unlike 1965, the previous blackout in New York, people were not as helping. People were helping each other out. The hospitals are making sure everybody was safe. This wasn't the case in '77.
Restoration of full electrical service remained vague as far as Con Ed is concerned. And given what occurred 12 years ago, Con Ed's performance is at the very least gross negligence, and at the worst far more serious. We've seen our citizens subjected to violence, vandalism, theft, and discomfort. The blackout has threatened our safety and has seriously impacted our economy. We've been needlessly subjected to a night of terror in many communities that have been wantonly looted and burned.
So since we were in like we were like in a low middle class, poverty borderline type of neighborhood at the time. People are trying to get out of obviously originally either moving to Queens or Long Island. That was the gasoline on the fire. Everything went crazy after the blackouts, the looting, the fires, cops were being assaulted. What else was going on? The hospitals were just the generators were going out. Everything, muggings on the subways. It was just mayhem. And remember, at this point, we had lost a loved one as well. Somebody who was very dear to me and my family, obviously my family, my brother. And this was like 2 weeks into that. So the American dream had turned into the American nightmare first, very quick. It was something that just like, I mean, I remember then after places were boarded up, my favorite stores, people were moving out, and until like 1979, even till we moved out, places were just left abandoned. The smell of fire, when there's fire and then it rains after, and you get that stench, that is still in my nose today. And you say, what do you mean? I go, when I smell something that's burnt and then got watered down, I think of Bushwick. Okay, that's how bad it was. People who had businesses for 60, from the beginning of the century there, laundromats or furniture stores, they people who gained trust with the people that were robbing them after. Just that left and said, "Fuck this, we're out." People who own property were doing insurance scams. It was just pure fucking mayhem, and looking back, I try to remember the good times, but at the same time, you say, well, you're 7 years old. Yeah, how do you remember all this shit? Because it was very fucking traumatic. A lot of bad things were going on. And then you had this fucking weirdo going around shooting people too. So
on that note, Frank, what's interesting is that not only was Berkowitz shooting people, he was also an arson. When he was arrested, they found a list of close to 1,500 fires that he claimed he set. I don't know. That's a whole other topic of discussion. I don't think he said all of them. I think that a lot of those he was scouting out neighborhoods to shoot people in, but he had a detailed list of 1,500 arsons in his book all over the city, including in Bushwick, including the South Bronx, like Crime Spot brought up before. So it's just another weird way to tie back the Son of Sam story into the whole Bronx is burning, Bushwick is burning, New York City is burning story that was going on at the time.
Yeah, it was a crazy time, and but there was good times too. And you say, what do you mean? I mean, the music scene was great. There's music that still brings me back. I love my disco music. I like all types of music, but the disco era, especially 1977, I think we talked about it with Brett. Studio 54 opens up.
Yeah, it opened up that year, actually. Yeah, in the spring of '77.
Block parties, people dancing on, in the block parties to the DJs that were playing the music that was popular today. It was a good time as well. I remember the kids playing stickball. Pride. It was a happier time until 1977 for us in particular, my family. But it was also, we also had good times, and I remember them as well. It was a fun time. Jimmy Carter was the man of the year. Am I correct?
I was only
man of the year. He was Time Man of the year. He was great person, horrible president. So there was a lot of stuff out there. What do you remember any of this Blackouts? Man,
I was only 4 when 77 came out. Okay. So that was just when I was first coming into consciousness, and the only thing I really remember, Frank, was the feel of everything, and it was like the same feel that you get when you look at like a movie like Saturday Night Fever. It just seemed everything was washed out, burnt out, dark, drab, dirty, run down, broken, abandoned buildings. I remember everywhere. But as far as coming into full consciousness I can't really say that I remember that I have any actual memories, just the feel of it all. And it was definitely dystopian.
you had to remember the damage that was created by these fires. I mean, it wasn't like the city um, got reconstructed everything real quick.
No, the legacy lasted deep into the 80s, into the Koch
It's correct.
administration. Yeah, you would drive down for us being in the Bronx, I would drive down
Mm.
the Deegan, and you'd see, abandoned building after abandoned building. And for a while, it was funny. You may remember this. They put on, to make them look a little bit more presentable, they put these fake windows on that were just like paper.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
And
Yeah,
all these buildings had fake paper windows, and
yeah.
yeah.
Very eerie. It kind of reminded me like the COVID fake people in the stands
Yes,
over the COVID
yes,
time. Yeah, no, yes, yeah. Of course I do. And
definitely.
yeah, I mean, I remember driving the M train when my mom were going um to visit family up in Ridgewood or something. It was like 3 stops, and looking, not didn't make the comparison back then, but looking back and looking at old WW2 stories of London of being hit in 1941, it kind of resembled that. You know what I mean? I look at those. Well, why would anybody want to live there? You know what I mean?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, New York was in rough shape. But on the flip side, as you say, people were still having a good time. They were partying, and of course, that whole urban ferment that was going on. That's what birthed punk rock. It's what birthed hip hop.
Right.
All the great stuff that would come out later in the early '80s was all sort of born in that time period of '76 and '77.
And let's not forget to mention the evil empire of baseball. Won its World Series.
Yeah, the Yankees.
One of
That was
two in 1977. And who owns a Reggie bar these days? You know, that's worth a lot of money, actually. I mean,
my
I wouldn't eat
coworker
one.
still has some.
I
I
haven't
wouldn't
thought of
eat
that in a
one,
long
but
time.
yeah.
Yeah, this is what the birth of Mr. October.
Mr. October, the old Reggie Martinez Jackson. He was a hero. You know, my brother just passed away. Joe was a big Yankee fan.
Mm.
And I remember him just getting excited about the whole series. He must have been, what, 15, 16 at the time. Brings back memories. My favorite brother, by the way. Yeah. So it's going back, but yeah, the Yankees were incredible. Yeah, you know that was their third. By the '78, they were in 3 World Series. Everybody fails
Yeah.
to remember that they were in the World Series in '76 and got swept by the Reds. And in '77 they win the World Series against the Dodgers. How crazy is that? This year we had the same World Series.
I know. It felt very vintage.
I looked it up. It's one of the biggest rivals in baseball, in sports for that matter. You know, they've been playing each other forever.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
both New York teams originally.
yeah, back in Brooklyn, the Dodgers. So I was conflicted. I think this is the first time I went for the Yankees. It was on a personal level for me.
Uh
And of course, they lose because I'm part of a losing franchise.
huh.
New York Mets.
Yeah.
Who fucking, oh God,
Oh,
horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, not to bring up '86 in this topic
Yeah.
of '77, but just briefly, yeah, the '86 was my year for the Mets, and I'll never forget that feeling.
Yeah, you're a Met fan as well, Manny.
Yeah, I mean, I just
Uh,
enjoy baseball in general. I have to say that I don't get too into the tribal warfare of it all.
yes.
I just will sit back and watch a game, and basically whoever's winning, I'll root for, because I always find I'm happier that way at the end.
I'm also a Seattle Mariner fan these days. That's because I go to a couple of the games a year.
Uh huh.
But no, I'm definitely a Met fan, and I will tend sometimes go for the Yankees when they're playing. I wouldn't have done that back in New York. It's just that it's a nostalgic thing for me. A
How
lot of
did
my friends and loved ones are Yankee fans, so I tend to
What was
have their
going on
back.
in the Met? What was going on with the Mets in '77?
Oh, I think they were involved in the worst freaking trade of all
70s.
time. Don't hold me to that. When they traded Tom, they had a name
That
for
was
it
the
too.
Seaver trade, right?
That was the Seaver trade. They got Doug Flint, Pat Zachary.
Pat
That was like the
Zachary.
beginning of
Yeah.
Oh
the.
my God, total
Yeah.
losers.
And the loser that I am, 2 years later, even though they fucking were just awful, becomes a Met fan only because some kids aunt took me to a ball game, and I thought like fucking Lee Mazzilli was bigger than God. You know what I mean? It was my
Oh
brother.
yeah, Mazzilli was
And
huge.
yeah, yeah.
He's definitely one of those people that you think about when you think about the late 70s in New York. He was part of that whole cultural scene. Lee Mazzilli,
Bucky Dent was that guy too. You know, they
Bucky
had the, like
Dent.
the ones that made baseball appealing for the women. You know, and
Yeah, true.
you know, and you had like the Ron Duguay and for the Rangers, they had
Yeah,
those
yeah,
Joy
yeah.
Dash commercials.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers those. They were corny as hell, but hey, teach their own. You know what I mean?
No, good comparisons. I mean, listen, 86, you had a infamous team, won a World Series. They've made documentaries about it. Same thing with the 77 Yanks. So it's a good
Yes,
comparison. I mean, you know, they've
I
made,
could,
I think they went as
yeah,
far as making a movie about that team, right?
right.
So,
Right. What was it? The Bronx is Burning.
Bronx is burning. Yeah. So
That was a
interesting.
good,
Yeah.
pretty good movie. I kind of like that movie. I think the kid who plays Greg Nettles, and we don't hold me to this, was the actual kid who caught that ball in
Is that
'96.
true, really?
Yeah, 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 yeah. He caught that ball when they were playing the Orioles, and I
Yeah.
think Jeter hit the home run, whatever it
Yeah.
was. It would have been a double today, but whatever. I mean, who, you know, they were incredible in the '90s. But back to the '70s, yeah, they had a great team. The Mickey Rivers, I call him Mookie, was their center fielder. That guy was awesome. He was fast. Who else played? Chris Chambers, Greg Nettles, Bucky Dent, Willie Randolph. The late
Goose,
Thurman Munson was the catcher.
Ron Guidry, Goose
Oh,
Gossage,
yeah, Catfish Hunter.
Catfish Hunter. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. You know, he North Carolina guy. When I used to go fishing around North Carolina. I used to pass by his hometown. It's on the border of Virginia and North Carolina. And when you get there, it says home of Catfish Hunter. I'm like, look where life brings me, right? Fucking, you know, get into the witness protection program, follow these people, and just to fucking be in their towns years later. I'm like, God damn, something. It's kind of fucking ironic, you know.
What was going on in mob life in '77 around the
Great
city?
question. Great question. I think the books were open back then. Am I correct, Brett? At the
Yeah,
76.
I think they were open in 77. Yeah, a lot of guys got made around that time, I'm pretty
A lot
sure.
of guys were getting made at the time. The great Joe Messino, and I say that with complete sarcasm, was made in '77. I think you know all these mob fuck. You know, as much as I know people and I was around people in the mob, I'm not as much as a fanboy or groupie as these people are, and I don't hold that against them because I find a lot of these shows entertaining. You know, there's a lot of guys out there on YouTube, and then there's the mob experts that I think are really good. Like DeStefano's one of my favorites. Anthony DeStefano,
Yeah, yeah,
you like
Yeah.
him?
yeah.
He's one of my favorites. Selman Robb, you know, the guys with the books. But Jonathan Quitney was one of my favorite reporters back in the '70s, just because it was harder to report on these guys than it is today.
Right.
You know, and more dangerous, obviously.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's
as far as
definitely I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
There's definitely a romanticization of that period. I don't know what it was like to be a mobster in the late '70s. It seemed like it was probably one of the assuming that you weren't about to get whacked by somebody. It seemed like actually a pretty decent life because they ran the city. They were constantly getting, you know, paid off from this, paid off from that. In my opinion, the city ran exceptionally well when the mob was in control, and they just seemed like
Yeah.
it just seemed like the late '70s was the last good classic time period before, you know, all the rats of the '80s and the RICO Act and the electronic
Hey, watch
surveillance.
that. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I actually don't know anything about your history, which is good because I'm a blank slate when it comes to you and
Well, you're
you
better
know,
off. Not that it's that's not exciting, but
Yeah.
but
yeah, that's I hear you. I hear you, 100%.
but a lot of the mob stuff, I think it's a nostalgia for times like '77 when we were all young. Some of us were little kids, but a lot of people who were into that genre were, you know, teenagers, and times were simpler, a little bit simpler back then. We certainly didn't have all the surveillance and all the social media that we have now, and it just seemed like neighborhoods were more cohesive. And I think that a lot of what people are into with the mob is strictly and this is just my opinion, a longing for a better time, whether it was real or not. Just like people want to relive what it was like back in the old days.
Yeah, the romanticism between
Correct.
the mob and the civilians is still popular. I think, people say that the whole genre. Some people might argue that the genre is not what it used to be in an entertaining point of view. However, I don't see it slowing down either. I think the reporting has gotten shabby. I think
Yeah.
a lot of the stories are being reciprocated,
Yeah,
and,
exactly. Because how many
and
stories can you tell? Like, you know what I mean? They, at this point, all the good stories have been taken up. Have already been told.
agreed. But there's definitely a lot of stories that are not haven't been told, and
Right. Right.
and who knows? It's just a rat away, I guess.
What would you guys, not to get too far away from the subject, but what would
Sure.
you guys say is the biggest gets right now, the biggest names to get right now that haven't been heard from in mob history, especially people from 77? Who would you say those people are?
Oh, the biggest
Well,
names, like like guys that did their time that are free that could talk.
Anybody associated with that
well,
life from 77?
that's a great question.
I
That is a
mean,
great
I
question.
can name a
Uh,
few.
yeah, and the whole thing about that is the big names of 1977, but the rare stories of the big names of 1977. Like I'll explain. Like I'm going to cover the cheese wars, okay, and how
Mm-hmm.
it affected my family,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be on an upcoming episode. And it's between the Gambino Sicilian faction and the Banana Italian, led by Carmine Galante, and his hatred for Carlo Gambino. And why was this hatred? Has the story been told? Yes. Has it been told on a personal level? Not my personal level. No.
Mm-hmm.
I'll explain that. And
Yeah. You're talking
the
about
people.
interviews, Manny, like somebody that could be interviewed.
Well, basically anything, but yeah, like the biggest names, the
Right.
biggest stories that haven't been told.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, like just basically who would you love to interview who was around in 77 who hasn't spoken yet?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's
Oh,
a bunch. I mean, obviously the Gemini twins who are out. You got guys like John Carniglia, Gene Gotti. I mean, these guys would
right.
be, wild to speak to.
And even
Who
though those guys
else?
are big names, I mean, at the time they were just making their bones. Okay,
Right.
but we're
Right.
talking about like I was on a documentary on National Geographic, and it was about Carmine Galante, and they have heard about him many a times. But the aspect they haven't heard on that certain documentary was one of
Yeah.
his daughter
Mm.
Angela. So she gave kind of like a how it was growing up being Carmine Galante's daughter. That's popular. When you get, I mean,
Yeah. Of
uh,
course.
that's a popular, or getting anybody from the past whose families were willing to open up about their obviously their father or
Right.
their uncle or whoever. That's always going to raise ears.
That brings me to actually a point that I've been telling Crime Spot about, which I think would make a killer subject. It would be the roles of the women in the mob, because there had to be mobsters, right, who were married to some badass girls who helped them in their crime sprees, right? Either
Sure.
hid drugs from the cops or
Yeah.
didn't speak to the cops or maybe were the go-between of a hit. But these stories have never been told of the badass women of the mafia. I know about the stories of people who were married to mobsters. Oh, it was terrible. Yeah, he was all. But I want to hear the stories of the outlaw
Right, right.
girls.
Right. I
'Cause
have a
Yeah.
relative of mine that fills that criteria. She was married to a boss in my town back in where I'm from, Castelmao del Golfo, and she's a strong woman. Yeah, she's a tough woman. Her name is Rosa, same last name as mine, and she actually went up to the couple years back. Went up to the Ocean 11 people were filming in my town, and she went on her own because her husband obviously was in jail, and try to get money from them, try to extort them. So
See, that's what I want to hear
That's
about.
funny. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and that's you guys could get that on
You mentioned
obviously.
Galante. I would like you to talk about him. I just want to mention a couple other things in '77. Of course, Carlo Gambino dies in '76. Paul Castellano is going to enter into his first year as the boss of the family. But you do have some other things going on in '77. You have these crazy Irish guys on the west side of Manhattan in Hell's Kitchen causing a fucking ruckus. They are trying to take over what became known as the Westies, what was referred to as the Westies, on Friday, the 13th of May, 1977, with help from Roy DeMeo and Danny Grillo and these guys. Mickey Spillane would actually be murdered outside his home in Woodside, Queens, after he left Hell's Kitchen. His team is getting whacked out, so which is a weird idea. It's like, I'm gonna leave Manhattan. I'm just gonna go over the bridge over here to Woodside, like you're actually hiding, right? And of course, Jimmy Coonan. Of course, Jimmy Coonan had a grudge on him going back to the mid 1960s. So they were able to do this with help from Roy DeMeo. And ultimately that year, this is when the Gambino family aligns with the Westies through Roy DeMeo, through them doing work. They would also kill the loan shark Ruby Stein inside the 596 club over there in Hell's Kitchen. Of course, this was a big money maker, a guy who had a lot of money, a guy that was well respected by the Gambinos, the Genovese, kind of one of these, one of these guys that had been in the game forever. Everybody respected him. Nobody was going to touch him. Basically, what the Westies did, they owed him a lot of money. They loaded up even more. According to Billy Beatty, he would say that Jimmy Coonan told him, "All right, guys, time to load up." So they took a bunch of money off him, lured him to the 596, murdered him inside that bar in Hell's Kitchen. And that's actually what caused the meeting at Tommaso Restaurant over there on 86th Street. And how this is what happens. The Gambinos make an alliance with the Westies. Roy DeMeo is kind of in charge of them. And they steal Ruby Stein's Black Book. Paul Castellano asks them about the book. They deny it. They even deny that they killed the fucking guy. They say, "Yeah, we don't know." And then Castellano basically says, according to what we know today, "All right, you be with us, and you better stop fucking killing people because you guys are just out of control. So if you want to kill anybody, talk to that fat guy over there, Roy DeMeo. He'll give you the okay," or whatever it was. So that's an interesting thing that occurs in 1977 too. A lot of the rise of those Irish guys in Hell's Kitchen kind of finally being respected by the, kind of forming up with the Italians.
I
If you
mean,
ask
so
Mickey Featherstone, Jimmy Coonan started pretending to be Italian. So interesting times.
wow, wow.
Yeah.
So it was fair to say they were a faction of the Gambino family at one point.
Essentially, I mean, I guess. I mean,
Oh
yeah.
wow.
I mean, I don't see how you could, Roy DeMeo was tasked with being, in charge of them as far as the businesses that they were into.
I get
And
money. I get money trumps a lot of stuff, but this was
yeah,
like the '70s, and the generic group of alcoholics and drug addicts,
yeah.
and Castellano signing up on that. Wow, that's kind of weird.
It's the same thing with like Bosco and like Gotti or whatever later, though, right? I mean,
Yeah, of course.
yeah. So it's basically birthed out of that situation in 1977. Then it hung on for as long as it did after that.
Yeah, no.
Um,
I hear you. This is all new to me. Not new, but I've just never really looked into it, and
yeah.
you know a lot about this stuff, so I'm kind of fascinated by it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
they go to Tommaso, Mickey Featherstone, Jimmy Coonan. Actually, I did a video on my channel for all of you listening a few months back where Tommaso is apparently closing, but they let me film in there. I ate, I reviewed the food, and I went into that room where the Westies met with Paul Castellano and I think it was Funzy Thierry. There, a bunch of guys were there, and they had this meeting to kind of make that alliance. So if you guys are interested in stuff like that, check it out. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah, no, yeah.
1977, man.
Wait, so
And then at the
Galante was killed in 77?
79.
79,
79.
but as me and Frank were talking earlier, and then looking, it was also a time where they were starting to worry about Galante, like law enforcement, the press. They were like, "All right, this guy is like kind of good. He's a major player. We're keeping an eye on him. What's going on with Galante, Frank?"
Well, the year before he kills a major Sicilian gangster by the name of Licata, Pedro Licata. So he's, and rumor has it, even went to the Costello's mausoleum and blew it up because he wanted to make sure he was dead twice.
Yeah. This
Some
picture's
sick
that.
stuff. And what he was doing at the time, and we're going to discuss, was he was trying to take every Sicilian Italian business he could, and to buy his products were pizza products, big money in that, cheese, sauce, and believe it or not, he was having help from a friend in Arizona, helping him out, getting him a couple of good accounts, and that was Joe Bonanno, because he had a lot of friends in the cheese business. But we'll talk about that as well.
And for the record, the Iceman Kuklinski did not, in fact, kill Galante, right?
No, he was not present. That he would have melted. He was the Iceman. It was 100 degrees. He couldn't have done it.
Yo, I fell
Yeah.
for that guy. I must say, I fell for all his BS.
Listen, that's going to be one of our episodes me and Brett talked about. We got a lot on our repertoire, a lot. I'm trying to just clear of all the older people in my life, but there's a lot left. And just
Frank spent a lot of time locked up with Sammy the Bull while he was being accused by Iceman of killing Peter Calabro, the cop in Jersey.
Oh,
I
I'm
didn't
looking forward
talk
to
about that, did I? I said I was going to do it.
You
Did I
a
talk
little bit.
about
You spoke about the lawyer. You spoke about the lawyer.
Did I talk about what he wanted, what his demands were, the Iceman?
Yeah, no, say it again for those who missed it, though.
All right, so the Anthony Riccio was Sammy's lawyer. This case was out of Bergen County. So this is what the time I was locked up with Sammy. So Sammy one day goes, Bo, that case is over with. We got him now. He's fucked. We got him. These Bergen County prosecutors just wanted to make a name of themselves by prosecuting Sammy, and the feds were pissed. They were like, "Look, he didn't have nothing to do with this. These people are crazy." So anyway, the Iceman calls this Riccio guy to come visit him in prison. I don't know what prison he was in at the time. I think it was Rahway. I'm not sure, which is a penitentiary in Jersey. And Riccio went there. They went to, he went to they went to visit him, and he comes out. They bring him out, and he writes on a piece of paper, that'll make everything go away for $200,000. The Iceman does. And he shows the guy the piece of paper. Riccio reads it. He takes the piece of paper, puts it in his mouth, and swallows it, okay? Correction officers bring the piece of shit back in his cell. The Riccio guy, very smart lawyer, by the way, takes the piece of paper underneath where he had printed what he wrote and brought it to the FBI. And they threw the case out.
Wow.
That's wild. Yeah.
Because the imprints were there. So the FBI took it and they said, look at this. They took his handwriting, print, they took a test and everything, and he wrote it. So that's how that case got dismissed.
Yeah, and Manny and anyone listening, and Manny, go to our channel. We dropped like a 25-minute kind of just a clip, not an episode of Frank talking about spending time with Sammy, from Sammy showing Puerto Rican guys how to get made, doing
you
the
never
ritual,
know. It might be
to all types of funny shit.
That's great.
You see him on stage for the president. He was on stage over there giving like what do you say? Trump's a real gangster.
Yeah, Trump's a gangster, Bo. Yeah, he's a real gangster. Yeah.
He's
Still
like
trying to curry favor.
He looked like a Sicilian Yoda.
Oh no.
That's good.
Oh no.
Yeah. You see the hat on, he had the
Sicilian Yoda.
That's hilarious.
Sicilian Yoda.
All right. So guys, listen, episode 4, 52 topics with Frank Fiordilino, 1977. I think this was cool. We covered a lot of things. We kept it loose, nice conversation going. That's kind of how we want this to go, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, we'll be rigid when we have to, but I think this was really cool. Frank, I'll give you a word, and I'll give Manny the last word to talk about anything that's going on with him and his channel and any work that he has ahead.
If anybody's interested, the song of the year was Rod Stewart's "Tonight's the Night." I don't know why. And then Andy Gibb was in check with "I Just Want to Be Everything." Andy Gibb,
Yeah.
BG brother, the youngest BG brother there, and that's it.
Okay, Manny, please plug what you're doing and let us know anything that you want to let us know.
Cool. Well, thank you very much once again, Crime Spot, for having me. And thank you very much, Frank, for being so gracious to allowing me on your guys' podcast today.
You were great. You were great.
Much appreciated. Not much happening in Son of Sam land. Sort of taking a break right now until 2025. Got some exciting international projects in the works that should be coming out, but I'm a big believer in keeping my mouth shut as much as possible. So all I'll say is look out for me on the big screen in 2025, and hopefully we'll be back with some kick-ass shows at that point.
Ladies and gentlemen, episode 4, 52 Topics with Frank Fiordilino, 1977. Hope you all have a great week. Thank you.